Yeah.
I think if you want, we can start.
All right.
Or maybe we can give a few more minutes. Or I can start with the introduction, okay?
Sounds good.
So I want to thank you all for joining us today at our opening talk of the .NET conference. I would like to give you a quick overview of the format of this talk before we move on to some introductions. The first part of the webinar will be Mihal's presentation, and we have saved some time for question and answers at the end. So there is a Q&A option in Zoom. You can post your questions there and even upvote the ones you find most interesting. If you want to make a comment or ask a question or share your experience by speaking instead of typing, you can always use the option raise your hand through the button on your console, and we will allow you to speak as soon as possible. Now, moving to some short introductions. Well, my name is Melissa. I'm Head of Tech Relations at Sartis, and I'll be the moderator for this talk. Our speaker is Mihal Simchak. I'm not sure if I pronounced it correctly, Mihal.
Yeah, that's good.
He's Principal Engineer at Sartis. To give you a short background on Sartis, we are a digital solutions company with more than 100 engineers distributed across Europe. We help companies to foster improvement in how they build software and to get applications built in a faster, better way through providing nearshoring, staff augmentation, and consulting services. We usually partner with companies across e-commerce, logistics, fintech, for example, medtech, and renewable energy, providing the people and providing the technological expertise to help customers achieve their business goals. As a company, we actually have extensive expertise in the area of .NET and numerous engineers working with Microsoft technologies. The purpose of this conference is to share our experience and also for us to learn from the questions asked and the insights shared by participants, attendees, and external speakers. I'm going to introduce now the speaker himself. He's Mihal, and as I said, he's a principal engineer at Sartis. He has worked extensively on projects with microservice-based architecture for both REST and message-centric designs with microservices orchestrated in Service Fabric and Kubernetes. He has a strong expertise in Azure and in AWS cloud services, and he is an AWS certified solutions architect. He's also an expert in .NET on stateless and highly scalable solutions. And I'm finishing here the small introduction. Maybe we can start with the presentation.
Absolutely, yeah. Let's get down to business. So welcome everyone. Today we'll be talking about collecting business critical information using Azure Application Insights. Here is a breakdown of what we're going to talk about. So I'm going to start with something I would call product confidence and delve more into how we look at our production environment. We're going to then do a short introduction to Application Insights. However, I'm going to assume, majority of the work you have to do actually outside of this presentation, but the basics will be provided. Afterwards, we're going to move to sound techniques, and I'm going to focus on the three I believe are like the most important ones, using Application Insights to kind of influence your product confidence. And in the end, we're going to take another look at confidence and reassess it based on the techniques I showed you. And we're going to check whether our product confidence has actually increased, because that's the goal here. I believe it's going to take about 30 minutes, and then we're going to have the Q&A that Melissa mentioned. So the product confidence. So you probably already have a product, or your team's working on a product. You're either a team member or a team lead or a CTO or VP of engineering, whatever your role, even if you're in product development, you probably worry, once my product's ready, what's going to happen to it? And you might have different reasons to have this product. You want to bring certain value, you want to save money by automating something, you want to make money, you want to make some difference in the world, regardless of what your value is, and it can be multiple working for you at the same time, at certain point you release your software to production, and you want to make sure it becomes a valuable resource for your customers or for your clients. So you're in production, and now what? So I have like 4 questions for you, which I would like to narrate through, and each one of you can actually try to answer that in reference to the project you're involved in. So let's say your application is in production already, potentially in Azure, but it can be effectively anywhere. And do you know right now whether your product's working as expected? And what does it mean, the product's working as expected? Things are complex these days. You might have a monolithic application. You might have a web-based application. You might have something in microservices or a mobile app. All of those components communicating with one another. How quickly can you find an issue in your product? So let's assume there is an issue. How quickly will you know about it? Once you know about it, how do you go about checking what went wrong? Do you guess, or do you come up with a hypothesis, or do you use some actual information, scientific information, to get to the bottom of the problem? Number 3, how can you fix your issue quickly, right? So obviously the severity of issues are going to differ, but is there a way to approach a problem in a quick and performant way? Also, once it's done, do you know it's fixed or not? Like, if I'm a developer, and if we're a part of the team, sometimes different hypotheses are thrown in the air, and sometimes you don't have time to verify those. You just go with that hunch. But if the problem's pretty big, how do you make sure you go in and you're spending resources on the one that actually has the highest chance of getting you to full availability? And finally, who knows about the problem first? Is it you or your clients? So I think we all know it shouldn't be the clients who know the first, right? But do you actually have a way of being the first, or is it just a coincidence you learn on your own? Especially now, certain businesses are global. They operate in a global way. So it's not like you finish at 5 p.m. and that's it. You need to make sure your business is available from the US and Japan and Poland and Spain, for instance, at the same time. And for that reason, you probably don't want everybody to look actively at it all the way along the clock. So how to make sure you're the first one to know, so that you can react to the particular situation accordingly, right? So these are the questions we're going to be talking about. You can have a different definition of your product confidence, but that's what I kind of use a majority of the time when talk about the issue and the matter. So let's work on those. And we'll use Azure Application Insights to do that. Azure Application Insights is an offering from Microsoft Azure. So if you're on Azure already, it's very easy for you to start using that product, that service. If you're not, it has a free tier, so you can start use that, and you don't have to actually be on Azure to start using that service. So what it does, it's a telemetry kind of application which monitors operations of the various applications and products you might have, regardless of whether that's an API, an MVC application, some kind of a background processing data for you overnight, a front-end application, SPA application, or a mobile app. For mobile apps, actually, App Center from Microsoft is the one you would go to in the first place, but you can always hook it up with Application Insights and export your data to Application Insights. For AI or App Insights, you have a number of SDKs available. So that means it's going to work not only with .NET C#, which is like a given, but also with Java, or I even found a SDK for PHP the other day. So if somebody wants to use it with PHP, that's something you can do as well. Obviously, native languages for mobile applications, even React Native supported. So there's lots of those. And Microsoft making sure you can go ahead with whatever the application you've got, you can start using Application Insights. You have a number of installation mechanisms available. The SDK is like the most obvious choice, especially for developers, but you can also do codeless monitoring for a quick start. So if you're already on web apps in Azure, you can just enable the monitoring of certain activities with just using that toggle available in the configuration page. You can also install kind of like a listening service, which is going to communicate with IIS or other applications, and is going to monitor your application for you. So effectively, without writing a single line of code, you can actually start using application insights. And even though most of the time you need the SDK, it's a nice way to start working with application insights. Like, you invest very little and you get back quite a lot. What application insights is going to do for you is going to monitor a number of things for you, especially your dependencies. So if you have other resources at Azure, like dependencies like SQL, other REST APIs, Service Bus, Cosmos DB, and other services, then you can use it, and all those dependencies, all those calls, all those interactions between your product and those services are going to be recorded as well. AI is going to aggregate the data for you in a single place. So even if you have microservices scattered around, a number of those, you're at HA and you have replicas of those, it's going to aggregate into a single place, which is a huge benefit, because then you can just query everything in one place, and you can also relate those components to one another and check whether they certain interactions or certain correlations you can see. As you can see in the graph as well, if you want it, you can export, you can work with the AI directly in Azure Portal, but you can also export to Power BI, or maybe just export to custom data, a custom data source, as maybe you want your data team to take a look at the data that has been gathered. So that's the quick intro to application insights. As I mentioned, it's just something basic. I wanted us to be on the same page. You can find more resources online, absolutely.
So, Michal,
yeah.
I have a quick question for you. So, is Application Insights the only service which does this job?
Right. So, a good question. I'm going to focus on Application Insights because it's like comes from the Microsoft world. However, there are other services that do the same from other providers. So things you might be familiar with might be from Amazon. You might have CloudWatch. You have ELK really. So Elastic and Kibana and Elasticsearch generally, that kind of stack. You have New Relic, for instance. There's lots of similar services. However, their offering is going to differ. And some are going to focus on infrastructure, some are going to focus on development side of things. But if Application Insight isn't right for you, try the other services. There's also Datadog. That one's pretty popular. But do consider, charges, etc., because they're going to cost you differently as well. But you do have options.
Of course. Thank you.
Cool. So let's talk about those, what App Insights can actually do for you. And I have 3 important techniques for you over here. So we'll be focusing on monitoring and the health and availability, also understanding product operations, and finally making the information transparently available to you, your team, and potentially the entire organization of yours. So the availability of your application, something that we're going to refer to as health checks. So you want to ensure your product is reachable to your clients and fully operational. What's more, you want to get notified as soon as something is wrong. So if you look at the left-hand side, you have a graph which was actually generated by Application Insights availability functionality. Obviously, the green dots show you that your application is fully available. The red crosses show you that it isn't. What's important here as well is you can have certain checks across the globe. So you can try if that application is available from Spain, from US, from Japan, from other parts of Europe, for instance, and react accordingly, depending whether one or two of those locations fail for you, and you can have certain actions or take certain actions depending on the rules you've got. But the fact that you can get notified is that very important aspect that you know before your clients if something goes wrong. And the way we go about implementing the availability is we define health checks, which is something that comes as a built-in capability of many frameworks these days. And this is especially true for ASP.NET Core, which simply supports this out of the box. And normally for health checks, you implement core dependencies. So if you require a SQL database connection for your application to work, include that in your health check so that if you cannot communicate with the database, that particular service is going to be identified as unhealthy and you'll be able to react. So you don't have to rely on HTTPS or any other availability as, okay, the request came in, but actually there are other resources that are unavailable, which are actually required. If you have resources that are not core, then for instance, Redis cache or something like that, which might enhance your application, but are not fully required. The application is still going to work even without it. Might not be as performant, but still going to work. Then consider those additional dependencies, and then it's your call whether you want to say if degradation of the service is fine, or you can accept that, or if your application is unhealthy altogether. What's important here is, especially if you're working with ASP.NET Core, take a look at a project which is called Diagnostics Health Checks on GitHub. And you're going to get a huge list of health checks, which the community has provided. So you can take a look at storage, you can take a look at various SQL, non-SQL services over there, you can take a look at service bus, you can take a look at even AWS offerings like S3 or DynamoDB. All those things are there and there's no point reinventing the wheel, right? So it's pretty important in that respect. Over here, you can see an example of how that health check could look like. So that's obviously for a web API kind of application, exposing this endpoint for you under /HC. And what you can see here, we're checking the availability of the database. We have RabbitMQ over here and stuff like that. And altogether, what you learn from this health check is the state of individual components, dependencies, and by returning a proper status to 100 or 500 or 400, you might have an information on the healthy of the entire system. Multiple locations I mentioned, Application Insights supports this, and you can have a number of calls made from different locations. You also want to monitor the components that are crucial to you, but it really depends on your business, what's crucial to you and what you can live without. Like this Redis cache is something that I mention quite often. And also that health check, you can consider reuse of it for your high availability. So whether you're using load balancers or application gateways in Azure, you can use that information for those services to measure the health of your application as well. For notifications, I'm going to mention more later in the presentation. So that's health checks. Now, okay.
Yeah. Yes, I want to make a couple of comments, if possible.
Yeah.
So basically, a person, one of our attendees called Sebastian. I think he would love to see your GitHub repo. He would like to see if you could send at some point the link. I probably will be sending all the information because we were planning to send the slides and everything. Maybe you also can share the link.
Yeah.
Is that possible?
Okay.
And yeah. And I also have a question that I would like just to ask, if possible. So in your day-to-day work, how often do your health checks fail?
Right. So the thing is, they don't fail that often anymore. But that's the thing, you have to have them to realize how often your application fails, because it almost definitely does, especially if you're in the cloud. You're going to have moments of unavailability. This might be your service bus throttling you. This might be some other, transient problems, communication problems, because of the nature of the cloud and so many services that we've got available, failovers to different regions, stuff like that. So as soon as you create those and you don't have any resiliency in your application, you're going to realize something's not right, because you're getting notified quite often. You need to build in resiliency into your application. So retry a call exponentially, have a policy against that. There is a very good library called Poly for .NET World, which allows you to achieve various resiliency policies. For SQL queries, for SQL clients, you have a very similar thing. If it fails, it can retry. Once you start implementing that, you're going to realize your application is going to become more resilient, and your health checks are not going, your failed health checks are not going to happen that often anymore. Having said that, they still might happen, and it's just real life, you know. To those situations, you will have to react. But what I like to say is, you learn by having these health checks, you learn, because, you know, developers will get annoyed that something like that becomes red. We don't like things to be red. And they're going to say, you know, we probably should take it in to our sprint or our iteration as a technical debt to improve. Maybe this component has been failing way too often. Maybe we have to look at that, you know, and they're going to take care of that during their tech debt work.
Thank you for your answer.
Okay.
I would like to take this opportunity just to remind to our audience, just guys, if you want to make a comment, share your experience, or ask a questions, you can type your questions through the Q&A function that we have in Zoom, or if you prefer, you can raise your hand and we will give you the floor to speak as soon as possible. You can continue, Michal, now.
And Melissa, how can we share those links that were asked for, we had the questions for later, or
yeah, I think we can share them later. Yeah, by email or yeah.
Okay. Okay, good stuff.
Yeah.
Cool. So now let's go to technique number 2. So now we have our health checks, but let's be honest, that's pretty high level information about your system. Is it working? Which components are failing potentially, but that's pretty much it. The power of application insights comes with your understanding your product operations. So App Insight is going to collect telemetry information for you, which is pushed from your product to AI servers. And the types of things that can be collected are requests. So if you have requests in your application, whether regular API or HTTP, HTTPS, regular MVC application, these are going to be reported with status codes, responses, times, everything. You're going to have exceptions. So by default, all unhandled exceptions are going to be logged for you, but you can also log specific exceptions in your code as well if that's something you want to do. What this brings, I'll mention in a second. You can have metrics. So let's assume you want to measure the CPU utilization, storage available, memory usage, or maybe if you're processing data overnight, you want to see how many requests to process you've got in your queue at all times. You can do that with metrics. You have dependencies, as I mentioned, SQL, other APIs, service bus. So these come in kind of built in, but you can have your own dependencies. If there is something very specific that you use, maybe a third party through some weird connection mechanism, you can code that yourself. You have trace information, which you can say, if you have logs and you log in something to a file or event, Windows events, you can have them redirected as trace to application insight, so that you can have this available for you for any kind of debugging session or production failure analysis. And as developers, we like to have as much information as possible. Obviously, at some point, it can be overwhelming to have so much information, but I'm going to show you how to work with that. And finally, you can have custom events. And this is especially useful for development, but also for product-related aspects. So for product-related, you know, imagine if you have, if you want to know if a new client signed up, you know, and you want to get notified every time that happens, because you then feel this level of, or you have this feeling of accomplishment. You can do that. If somebody purchased something, you know, or you made a record on somebody entered this unknown level of the game or a very high level of the game, that's something you might want to be notified. Things can be technical, but they can be business oriented as well with application insights. And I think your product team is going to be very happy if you tell them about it. So what you can see here, we have some basic basic graphs about availability, server requests, response times. These things you can measure. For instance, all the requests come back to Application Insight with response times. So you can actually get the averages and see, you know, if certain requests take longer than the average, or some of them are pretty quick and some are pretty sluggish, right? And now, with all this information, certain things Application Insight is going to provide you out of the box. And just imagine being able to, okay, and I'd like 4 examples for you. Imagine being able to identify 3 most common exceptions in your product. So you don't have to guess what they are. You can actually go to Application Insights. Application Insights, and pick the second graph, the 3 top exceptions. And based on that, you can prioritize your backlog. Let's say you have an agreement with your team that you take 1 exception at a time every sprint as a tech debt. And this way, after a few sprints, you'll be done with the most common exceptions, you know. Also, name most commonly failing dependencies. Sometimes you know something's not working, but if you're in the microservice realm, you'll probably have so many microservices you talk to, and it might be difficult to identify which one's failing for you. With this, you can check, and now you have the incentive to actually maybe contact that team or that service provider to talk to them. What's wrong? Maybe it's something on their end, or maybe you need to improve the way you're communicating with that service altogether. You can list most commonly used browsers, for instance, and this can cut your development and testing time heavily. Let's say, you know, a few years ago you were told, you know, you need to support this outdated version of Internet Explorer, and your reports in Application Insights are going to tell you effectively nobody or very few people are actually using that version. This can go to you back, and you can get that time back by not developing for that version anymore. And your testing doesn't need to cover this as a priority. So you can actually get feedback from your testing team quicker. And finally, see the least performant components of your product. So you can this way identify critical path and introduce optimizations where they actually matter. So it's very common for development teams to just guess, you know, something's slow, it's probably this, you know, and we're going to introduce parallelism and try to do things concurrently. And sometimes it's just a guess that didn't really work out. With this approach, you will have scientific data, where to start, where to invest your money and time to get some clear benefits. And the things I mentioned before come to you out of the box. But then at certain point working with Application Insights, you're going to realize that effectively you need more. You know, you want to be able to make queries yourself. You want to be able to make graphs yourself. And there is an option like that to query your logs through something that's called custom query language. It's an SQL-like language, which allows you to retrieve data, treat it as database, really, as a relational database. And even you can enrich those results with graphs, as you can see in the picture over here. What you can do is query past data or a given time period. So you don't have to react to situations as they go along. You can say, I'm going to analyze that bulk load we did last night. And you can just spend a day just analyzing that data in the past. You can use properties for your events, and some come in as built-in, like origin country, used browser, operation ID. Actually, operation ID is an interesting one, because with every request coming in, that request and every log that's going to happen, a piece of telemetry, it's going to have a unique identifier. But then when you request, I don't know, for instance, that product page to show up, it actually can generate a number of calls to the database to get the product, to the stock availability API microservice, which is going to check if that product's available at all, and other calls. And all of those are going to share the operation ID, which is then going to make it very easy for you to just query by that operation ID and see all the requests, all the telemetry that's related to it. And as you can probably imagine, it's going to simplify your troubleshooting session quite heavily. You can also introduce your custom properties. So whatever makes sense in your business, your account ID, customer ID, even payloads, you can attach JSON, and Application Insight is going to allow you to traverse that piece of data as well. Obviously, in those situations, it's important to sanitize your data. You probably don't want, home addresses there. You don't want credit cards, IDs, etc. So we remember about that. And look at the example query I have here. So we're taking all the requests where data is up to 48 hours ago. And we're going to summarize it and have average of durations grouped by 10-minute intervals, right? And that is going to be rendered as time charts. So that means time is on your x-axis. And with such a simple request, you can get a very knowledgeable graph. This is super important to understand how to do that, because we're visual. We need visuals. And for that reason, you can also have multiple series depicted in the single graph. And this can actually show you correlation between different things. For instance, the performance of your application and the availability of the service bus, for instance, and whether there is correlation between these two. And for advanced scenarios, that's something you will need sooner or later. So that's Custo query language. And now something like a very nice thing. I love this functionality of Application Insights. It's a map of dependencies, application map. So imagine your application having a number of components, and being able to see all those components, relations between them, health of them individually, and potentially performance between those on a single graph. And that's what you can do. This way, as you can probably imagine, you will be able to identify bottlenecks in your application quicker, and you'll be able to drill down by double-clicking into specific logs and specific pieces of information. And that's a huge thing, because you have so many things as components, health, calls, and performance available to you in a single screen. And very often, that's a very good place to start your analysis. And basically, this is the place I go to very, very often. Also, this is a very nice thing to show people that join your team. If you want to show all the components and all your architectural graphs are outdated, come here and you might as well be able to show them more than you thought. Technique number 3. So we have all this information through health checks. We have collected all this telemetry, and we can now query and we can now visualize. What's super important is to ensure all that data is available to your team. So if you're a team lead and you hog all these capabilities and information to yourself, it's not going to work. You go on a holiday, you're unavailable, somebody does not know how to approach this. Also, if you make it available, but you don't train people or show them how to use it, and what's the benefit of using that, they might not start using that, and you're not going to see the benefits of implementing Application Insights in your application. So one way to do this is to create dashboards. And the example you've got here is actually on the left-hand side, you've got information available from App Insights. And on the right-hand side, you've got some additional security and network information. So you can have dashboards that span across multiple pieces of information, and that's fine. You can also have ones that are dedicated to Application Insights. And just looking at these graphs, you're going to see, what are the failed operations? What's the breakdown of the users you've got? What's the availability of your product? What's the timeline and the average response time here at 66 milliseconds? So, if your teams have this habit of checking that on a regular basis, or come in here when they suspect something's not working, or they have been notified something's not working, they're going to have all that information available at their disposal very, very quickly. Also, let me stay here for a second. Those queries I mentioned from Custo language, some of them can get pretty lengthy and complex. That means you don't want to redo them every time. You can create it once and share it through Azure Portal with your team members. Then they're going to be able to see those and run them without actually writing them on their own, spending time writing them, which is a great feature. Regarding health checks, I mentioned the notifications. So for business critical situations, you have to act actively, right? Whether that's within your business hours or whether that's outside of your business hours. You want to be able to notify your team if something like that happens. And the monitoring capabilities of Application Insights allow you to do that. So you can send an email or an SMS, a push notification, you can have Slack notification, or you can use webhooks to actually be able to notify relevant people about a certain situation. You can also have a lot of those notifications. So if there is a problem with the health check, you can notify a different group of people. If compared to there is just a degradation in the performance of your application, then you can notify a different set of people or in a different way. But still, you need to push information rather than pull information. So don't ask your team to keep checking something on a regular basis, because they will get bored very quickly. And there is that potential for human error. Notify them, push the information out, but be clever about it. You don't want people to get notified every single hour, because then they're going to get numb for this kind of notifications. For Slack, what's interesting here is that it's not really supported out of the box, but there is a logic app which you can install into your Azure environment, and then that one is going to be capable of using that webhook to send it over to the webhook of Slack. So it's not a direct line, but it's available. And also webhooks are interesting because maybe you want to react differently to a situation that happens within your business hours than if it happens outside of your business hours. Application Insight is not going to handle that logic for you automatically, but if you want, you can have webhooks. So you can be notified to an API you've got, and then you can make that distinguishment on your own and just say, notify team lead if it's outside business hours. If it isn't, just send it to Team Slack. Okay, so it can get, you don't have to rely on the tool entirely. You can tweak it to your needs as well. And here is a quote I would like you to remember, because that's something I like to remember myself. And sure, everyone has access to the tools to feel confident in the product. So if they want to, be able to go home and feel like they've just released something super important to production, and you want them to have a good night's sleep because you know how hard they have worked on the product, make sure they have this availability. Because as soon as something happens, they know they have tools at their disposal. They don't have to guess anymore. Also, after months and months of using this, they will create this organical product confidence, because they've known, we've observed our product for months now. We know, we trust it, because we know it doesn't fail that often anymore. And I guess what I want to say here as well is, confidence is a science. It's not a faith. It's not faith, right? You shouldn't have faith at your product. You should base it on specific scientific information. So let's go through that confidence assessment thing that I mentioned before. So we have exact same questions, and let's try to answer once again, bearing in mind the 3 techniques we talked about. So is your product working as expected? Yes, it is, because I have this notification system in place that will let me know if something goes wrong, right? Also, if I have no notifications, I can always go to the dashboard and just have a quick check whether the orders are still coming in and the average response time is within reasonable boundaries. How quickly can you find an issue in your product? Well, pretty quickly, I would say, because I can just go and check what are the most common exceptions, or what are the dependencies that have failed, or whether my product's available at all. Can you fix any issue quickly? Well, if it's a difficult issue, you probably still need to take time. But the benefit you've got here is that you can pinpoint the issues directly to where they actually are. You don't have to guess anymore. How do you know it's fixed? Because you're going to see change in your telemetry almost immediately. Remember, there is a small delay between when you send a piece of telemetry and when you see it in Application Insights, but it's still a few minutes. So you know there has been an improvement pretty quickly anyway. And who knows about the problem first, you or your clients? It's obviously us from now on. It's the team and the site reliability engineers who know first, and you don't have to, say sorry to your clients anymore, because you have a team who can react immediately to a particular situation. And then maybe if they know, okay, this area of the application has been affected, or the other area, they can actually notify relevant teams rather than just guess or ask everybody to chip in and to start working with you on the matter. So I hope with this few techniques, I helped you increase your confidence in the product. That's definitely something I'm using in my teams to have this confidence in whatever we're building. So I think now we can go to the Q&A session.
Thank you for the presentation. It was actually very nice. I was going to ask you one more question just out of curiosity, but I'm going to go straight to the questions asked by the attendees because there are a few.
Okay.
So they're like, just to let you know, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay.
Okay.
So Jeff asked actually 3 questions. I'm going to ask you one by one. The first one is, does Application Insights automatically create and track the correlation and request ID for microservice?
Yeah, if you use it through the HTTP client, then it's going to include that for you automatically. If you have some other things between, for instance, you have a service bus, then that unfortunately breaks the path, right? So if your service sends something to the service bus and then another service picks it up, this might break your path, and you need to specifically add it to make sure this is handled properly, and that correlation ID, operation ID is effectively passed along.
Okay, good. Another one from Jeff as well. So, do you write custom login libraries for your applications to track activities in the AI? Or is all of this automatically tracked by artificial intelligence? So he thinks maybe there is no point in reinventing the wheel.
Yeah. So that's an interesting one, because many of the things through the layered architecture of ASP.NET Core, let's talk about this offering, would handle many things for you, because it will be able to tell you, okay, these are the requests you've made, the dependencies actually it listens to based on the calls you've got in the system, like SQL and that HTTP requests, it's going to listen to for you automatically. But you want to do the trace for you, and you also want to be able to maybe send some logs without relying on that automated mechanism. So you do have SDK from Application Insights available, so you can interact with it directly and say, publish me this, send me a dependency, send an exception, send a trace piece of information. And that's fine, but that also means you're interacting with Application Insights SDK directly, which not many developers like to do. So you can actually use the login libraries that are available, and there is lots that actually support Application Insights as one of the providers. So for instance, if you're on Log4j, which is one of the most commonly used login frameworks, you can add an appender that actually goes to Application Insights for you. So you don't have to change your code to use Application Insights. You just add an appender, which is potentially just a piece of configuration, and that's it. But what I wanted to say here as well is within the new .NET Core, you also have the abstraction of iLogger. And I would encourage you to start using that. So iLogger is something that's built in, and it has that abstraction of, most commonly, most verbose notifications you might have, like info, warning, etc. But under the hood, you might configure it to actually use Log4j, Application Insights as a provider, or wherever else you've got, right? You might actually, what happens quite often is, mostly because of the DevOps engineers who would ask you to do that, is you will be posting to Application Insights, but also to that Windows event log at the same time, because if it's a virtual machine, they want to have operations from that virtual machine available on that machine so that they can RDP and just check. So with iLogger, some kind of abstraction, you can actually use a number of providers and have some kind of a composition that's something that's sometimes something you want to do, depending on your needs, though.
Good, thank you. There's a last question from Jeff.
Mm-hmm.
So, are health checks automatically created, or do we need to add that programmatically in the code at high-risk places?
Yeah, so they're not automatic. Your health check can be pretty simplistic. For instance, you have a landing page, right? It's just that mycompany.com kind of situation. You know, if that's the kind of thing you've got, you can have a very simple health check. You create a health check on your landing page, and you just expect, you can then provide a number of conditions. For instance, you want this to return a status code to 100, and you want it to return it within the reasonable time frame, let's say up to 5 seconds or up to 1 second. And maybe, in addition to that, you want to check if in the footer it says something like a text, mycompany.com at 2020. So this way you're going to create a health check which just checks your landing page, but it's pretty clever anyway, as you can see, because then you can check whether your website is actually available from all those different locations across the world. So that's a very simple thing you can do. On application insight side of things, you have to do it specifically if you want to go through availability. However, if you have application insight SDK kind of submitted to your, kind of connected to your application, even without specific health checks, it's going to count your availability because it knows it's receiving certain events, right? But whether that availability is the one you're interested in is a different story, because to me, availability is whether that product can be actually used. So it can be operational under the hood, but if it cannot be reached by your clients, you might still be in trouble, right? The mechanism I showed you with the JSON thing, though, is like the most advanced version of health check you can have, because you don't only check whether that response was served by the server. Here we talk in HTTP, obviously, but also you want to check additional components. In that example I showed you as well, I can actually go back to it. Over here, you also see something like duration, right? So along with the health check, you can also kind of embed information on how quickly that particular component returned healthy, right? So this way you can also start measuring that, because maybe once you get very advanced with health check and your application is very resilient, you want to be notified when things take slightly too long as well. Or you just might want to be warned, maybe not notified, but warned, you know? And then you can see on the graph, maybe 50% of the time, the website was available under 1 minute, 20% under, 1 second, then above 1 second, whatever the metrics make sense to you. So there is definitely gradation here. And the final thing I wanted to mention, application insights provide you this basic mechanism, sure. But if you want something super advanced, because you have so many components, you cannot really rely on application insight anymore. That project I mentioned, we're going to send post a link to that in a moment. It also supports this health check UI. So if you want to have a custom website in your product, this is especially important for I would say monoliths, which you want to be able to log to and then see a list of all the components and their availability. Then you can do that as well. So slightly different mechanism for super advanced situations where application insights no longer sufficient for you. Let's put it that way.
Very good. So just letting you know that there are 5 more questions remaining, okay?
Yeah, probably need to speed up.
Let's see. Anyway, Jacob asked a question. Well, there are 2 in one, I believe. So
okay.
How the integration with application insights affects application's performance? And have you ever managed to measure that?
Yeah. So personally, I stand by a point of view saying, I don't want to say I don't care about performance degradation, but I need application insights so much that I'm going to accept the performance degradation, all right? So to be honest, I have never measured that because the benefits of having this are so huge, you don't want to focus on the side effects really. But what's important, what I need to say here is Application Insights SDK is going to be as clever as possible to make as little burden on your application as it's only possible. So for instance, it's going to send all those telemetry in the background threads. So it's not going to block your application. Obviously, it needs resources for that, but still it's not blocking the performance of your application directly. What's important as well is by default, you're going to have sampling enabled. And you can have sampling on the SDK side of things and on the application insight side of things. So if events being sent are the same, for instance, you have a heartbeat or something like that, which just checks something very often, and effectively you send exactly the same telemetry. It doesn't differ by anything. It's actually going to be grouped together, sending the application insights as one, and it's going to have a property saying how many instances were grouped into a single entry, so that you can still know that. This way, it's kind of trying to be intelligent to send as little as possible. But yeah, if you have a highly performant application, it might be sending quite a lot of telemetry for you, right? So we need to bear that in mind. But we have things that are pretty performant in my current team. I don't think I can name the figures here, but thousands of things, tens of thousands being supported every second, and we still happily support this with application insights still being enabled. But I'm sure you can find also some answers online on the performance aspects of application insights, because it has been improving over the years as well. Okay.
Thank you. So Ava is asking, there are 4 questions there. They're kind of yes, no answers, could be. So the first one is, does Application Insights support PostgreSQL on-premise?
Of course, like it's a dependency. So whatever the dependency is, it's going to support it. But remember, it's always going to send your information to Application Insights servers, which are Azure-based servers. So if you have everything on premise, you still need to be able to have this communication to go to the outside world. But all the dependencies, either on premise or cloud-based, are supported.
So does Application Insights works on premise?
It does, but it still has to go outside. At least at the moment, that's the offering they've got. I don't think this has changed. If you need something that works purely on premise, you might be required to either have a VPN connection to Application Insights, to Azure servers, if that's something you can accept, which is then super secure, or you need to look at other products, because there are products which do a similar job and are available on premise as an installation.
Okay. Let me ask you another question. I'm not sure about if I'm asking this correctly. I'm gonna read what it says, okay? So does Microsoft agreement may use Application Insights data?
If Microsoft can use the App Insights data?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I understand this that way. So I don't think I have like pretty clear answer, because have never looked into that, because the reality is we as teams at Zartis rely on cloud providers pretty heavily, whether that's Amazon or Microsoft Azure. For that reason, we know we're benefiting from their services, and I don't think they have access to your data, because it wouldn't make sense. But maybe they're just using some kind of high-level metadata to kind of analyze it for their services, So what kind of data you aggregate and so on. But I'm afraid I don't have answer to that. So the author of that question would need to look into this a bit further. Having said that, I just wanted to say that this is an interesting topic as well regarding GDPR here in Europe. Because Azure is fully GDPR compliant, you also have an ability to choose where you store your data. For that reason, it's still GDPR or ISO or PCI compliant if that's something you want to do. Remember to strip your telemetry from data that would identify your customers, like their addresses and so on. But I wouldn't worry about Microsoft here as much as I would be worried about my own team members, right? Nobody here in your team should have access to, for instance, home addresses of your customers. So definitely look into sanitization, but mostly because you want your customers to be kind of protected and shielded from your own teams.
Yes. The last one, okay? We're going to go for it. It's again from Ava, the last question. How do you set up roles and trigger in Application Insights?
Roles. Triggers. I'm not sure if I understand, but you do have roles. So if you want people to have different access to Application Insights, you can do that through the IAM service. As any other service in application, in Azure altogether. Having said that, as I mentioned, it's very important for everybody to have read access, or at least as many people, because you want them to be able to query and analyze problems with the system. And if you have your data sanitized, there shouldn't really be a problem, right? Because you're not giving them access to data that might be fragile or business critical. But it allows them to operate on the product. And then the other part of the question was, Melissa?
Do you set up, sorry,
The notifications.
No, it says, sorry, because I put it in this answer section, so I can't find it anymore.
Yeah. I think it was about notification alerts and notifications, right? So
how do you set up roles and triggers in Application Insights?
I think by triggers, the author meant alerts and notifications. So you do have a panel for Application Insights where you can specify alerts, and they can be called health checks, for instance, as I mentioned, but they can be also in any other telemetry you're picking up. So if, for instance, you want to be notified if the average response time in the past hour has degraded to 1 second compared to 100 milliseconds before, you can do that as well. So use the alert thing, and you can have many, many alerts depending on what you need. Just bear in mind to name them correctly, because if you have too many called notification 1, 2, 3, it's probably not going to work. But yeah, there is that panel. You can use that, and that should provide you the functionality you need. The querying mechanism is really powerful. There's also something called intelligent notifications. So Application Insight is going to notify you when it thinks it's relevant, which is pretty clever, but sometimes doesn't work as greatly as it sounds. So it's going to monitor your application for months, and at some point it's going to realize, looking at historic data, they're actually using machine learning here, looking at historical data, these requests from the past hour, they have been taking too long. And even though you don't have an alert for that, but you have those intelligent alerts enabled, it's going to send you that information anyway.
So, Michal, we have here Ava.
Yeah.
He raised his hand just to talk, because I think he wants to clarify some things of his questions. Ava, feel free to speak if you want. Ava, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi, Ava. I think you might be mute on your side, so yes, please check that.
I think Ava can't speak.
Hi, do you hear me?
Oh, I can hear now.
Great.
Yes. My question was clarify on the triggers events. So you can think about an S3 in AWS that you can have like an event that you can log and create some kind of a workflows. for example, like you have a certain threshold that something happened, and not necessarily that you want to trigger an email alert, or if you didn't get to receive an email alert for a certain amount of time, you're doing X. If something hasn't happened, you're doing more customized event-driven workflow based on application insight event. That's, after you collected enough information, you can tailor certain behaviors and activities that you would like to happen through the system. Is this something that is supported, and how do you do it? That's also the question. Supported, I'm sure you can write code and hack it, but is it something easily supported that you can do it through the system?
Absolutely, it is definitely supported. So you do create a regular notification. What's important here, you would need to make sure the querying mechanism that Application Insight has available is enough for you, because you can do certain queries like, here's the threshold I'm interested in. Above that, if it takes longer than 10 minutes or an hour, notify me. Okay, but maybe you need something more granular, and I've been through situations where that querying mechanism, querying language wasn't granular enough for our needs. But if it is, you have kind of an event, and how you notify, it's up to you. So you obviously can have email. As you mentioned, this is not what you need. You can have a webhook, so you would need to specify an API which would be called in that case, or you can have a logic app if that's something you use in your organization, but you also have Azure Functions. So that serverless offering from Azure, which you can use, and this one will be notified if that happens. And in your Azure Functions, you might have whatever logic you want to use. But what I need to emphasize here is you can do that, but for regular eventing, going through Service Bus or things like Event Grid, for instance, from Azure, makes more sense, because everything with Application Insights will be slightly delayed. So probably don't use it for business-oriented operations, but if it touches on your product, its operations, and it's okay for you to get that notification delayed slightly, then it's fine. But if you want to be notified immediately if an order was created, because then you need to reserve stock and prepare shipping, etc., you probably want to go with a different product.
Thank you.
Thanks. Melissa, can hear you.
Okay, I think now you can hear me, right?
Right.
Thank you for
it's great we had this interaction, Ava. So thanks for speaking up.
Yeah, thank you. I think we are finished. We're done for today.
Right.
So basically, we would like to thank Michal for sharing his experience with us today and for all the questions and observations shared. Just a quick reminder, this is day 2 of 3 of the .NET conference. So tomorrow we have 2 more talks covering very interesting topics. And if you haven't already, you can register through Eventbrite for any of the webinars tomorrow. We will feel free to contact us just in case you would like to explore these or other topics with us in more detail. And in the coming days, we will be following up with each of you to share additional content regarding this topic. Hope you all have a nice day. And as well, you, Michal.
Thanks, Melissa. I just wanted to mention to all the participants, I just pasted that link to diagnostic health checks. There was a question about it. So it is available in the chat. You just need to open the chat window. It's a project available from GitHub. It's really useful so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Thank you, Michal. Have a nice evening, okay?
Have a nice evening, you all.
Bye.